Konnichiwa, YouTube. I hope I found you well. Hope you're having a nice holidays. I had to work all holiday, and so it wasn't all bad, though, because I got to reread some of my favorite books. And one of my absolute favorites is The Partly Cloudy Patriot by Sarah Vowell. Now, Sarah Vowell of NPR fame, This American Life, with her monologues, I've been a huge fan for years, but her books are sort of a nerdy history lesson, and she takes these road trips to American historical destinations and gives you a personal view and adventure and interprets history through a nerdy sort of NPR lens. But her first trip was down the Cherokee Trail of Tears, which she started in Calhoun, Georgia. She probably should have started in Rome. There's actually more sites in Rome than there are in Calhoun, but she's one of my favorites because I've got more books by her than any other writer, I believe. Take the Cannoli and Assassination Vacation, which was also wonderful. Different presidential assassination visits and some unique historical and psychological insights in all these books. But the Partly Cloudy Patriot has to be my favorite. And she's a nerd, and like me, she's a history nerd and an NPR nerd, and the story she tells, she talks about her early OCD in life, and she's got that flat nerd voice. I really think she has Asperger's syndrome, but she needs to do a next book on that with maybe a history and a road trip and a diagnosis. That would be awesome, Sarah. I'd love to meet Sarah Vowell's in person one day. But anyway, it falls into the category of books of like nerdy social commentary like Sex, Drugs, and Cocoa Puffs by Chuck Klosterman, which is hilarious, and also a Generation X specific book. And her NPR compatriot, David Sedaris, his hilarious book, Naked. I definitely think Naked was his funniest book, and the rest of them, not so much. But Sarah Vowell is by far my favorite because she's the most like me. She's a nerdy, sort of withdrawn individual. She's 2 parts loner and 1 part joiner. I'm maybe 3-4 parts loner and 1 part joiner. But she wants to engage at social togetherness, from a distance. And she's a political nerd and a history nerd. And being a nerd, as she says in the book, probably the most quoted line is in being a nerd, which is to say going too far and caring too much about a subject is the best way of making friends that I know. I'm not sure I totally agree with that. I think being a nerd is mostly genetic, and then it's a coping strategy, and it's a special interest. And of course, there's different kinds of nerds. There's the most recognizable, the computer nerd, and all these billionaire computer entrepreneurs now that we know have Asperger's syndrome. But there's other types of nerds. There's the abstract thinking nerd, and the history nerds, and there's even sports nerds of a certain type. But in her best chapter in the book, she talks about the battle between nerds and jocks. And in that chapter, she talks about going to the first Bush inaugural 2001 after the stolen election of 2000 and crying. And I remember I cried when I first read it. And rereading it this weekend, I almost cried. And then on the way home, well, first, she talks about Al Gore wasn't liked because he's a nerd. Because if you know something in this country, you're not knowledgeable, you're a smarty pants. You're not smart, you're a smarty pants. And people get annoyed with knowledge, and people don't want to think. The philosopher Bertrand Russell said that people would rather die than think and do every day. So people prefer confidence and jocks will always win the popularity contest. And now, true, that election was stolen by the Supreme Court and was very close. And the Electoral College came into play. And but also there is this other fundamental problem that Americans generally, in a popularity contest, the jocks edge out the nerds. They hate knowledge more than they hate knowledgeable people more than they uh, so much so they'd vote against their own interests. And see, I'm still not over that 2000 election. Forget about 2016. I mean, I'm definitely not over that. But we had the same problem in 2016, and I'm not saying there's not. I've talked about all those problems with the money in the system and two parties corrupted by corporate donors and the professional uh, class of Democrats that we've got. But there's also these democratic issues, which are partly the product of a long-running democracy, that it prefers mediocrity. This is what Alexis de Tocqueville talked about in Democracy in America in 1835, that the tyranny of the majority is such that it drags us down, and we pick the uh, uh, the less intellectual candidate and even vote against our own self-interest. But on the way home Saturday night after reading that, I was in Adairsville, Georgia, and I got behind a truck that was painted to be the